What is up, my friend? Welcome back to the basement. I am Mikey Henninger. This is Basement Brood Fantasy Football. Thank you so much for being here. What I'm told is the greatest fantasy football podcast in all of Franklin, Wisconsin. I'm told by my wife, who's never once listened, but she's pretty confident it is the best podcast in Franklin, Wisconsin. I apologize ahead of time if you hear or see my sick 3-year-old daughter come walking into the camera, or if you hear her on the baby monitor. She's currently napping, so I'm trying to knock out this podcast before she wakes up. This is the life of a solopreneur / dad trying to raise 2 kids under 7 years old. But this is episode 18 of the Basement Brood Fantasy Football Podcast. Today we're going to cover the Week 9 waiver wire, or probably more accurately, especially this week, the Week 9 Wake early addition candidates, because frankly I don't think there's anybody that's worth using any type of priority or fab money on when making waiver claims this week. Instead, I would just wake up early on Wednesday morning and add some of these guys. We're going to start by recapping my waiver wire philosophy for anybody who hasn't tuned in to a previous waiver wire episode. In fact, there's only been one, so I'll recap what that looks like, but then we're going to dig into an article. I posted an article on my website just moments ago. It has 36 different players and defenses for you to consider adding to your fantasy football roster before Week 9 begins. We're not going to cover all 36 today, and obviously you can't add all 36 unless you're in a crazy league. But they are 36 different players and defenses for you to consider adding. There's no need to write these down, and if you're like me and you listen to podcasts while you're driving, there's no need to stop and pause and write these down. You can just go right over to basementbroodff.com, click on content, and it'll be right there. But yeah, 36 different players and defenses. So real quick, to recap my philosophy, I tend to be very, very, very frugal when it comes to waiver wire and my fab money. I'm not trying to spend a lot of money, and typically I only enter a waiver claim if it's on a player that I'm certain will be in my starting lineup either this week or next week or one of the weeks that are ahead of me. I want to be 100% certain that they will be in my starting lineup. If they're just a nice to have or a depth ad or a speculative ad, I'm not going to use any sort of priority on them, but I am going to wake up early on Wednesday and consider adding them to my roster. So I play in 22 different fantasy football leagues of all different shapes and sizes. Some have really deep benches, some have really shallow benches, some have 14 teams, some have just 10 teams. So all of my leagues vary in size, and that's why I put together every week, I put together this list of players for you to consider using waiver priority on, but also a list of players for you to consider adding after waivers run and waking up early to do so, getting ahead of your competition who's sleeping in, right? That's what it takes to be successful, grinding when everybody else is sleeping. So if you're listening on podcast, I'm also sharing my computer screen so that the people who are watching on YouTube are able to see the article and perhaps one of the resources that I'm going to dig into here. So I do recommend checking it out on YouTube when you get a chance to. But the first name I want to dig into, we're going to go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end. And the first and pretty much the only name, it's not a big week for quarterback streamers. The first and pretty much only name on my list this week is Justin Fields. He is 42% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Over his last 4 games, he's actually averaging 21.2 fantasy points per game, and that's largely because the Bears have finally embraced using him as a rushing threat, as a running quarterback, as a cheat code in fantasy football. He's getting about 10.5 and 69.25 10.5 carries and 69.25 rushing yards per game over the last 4 games, and he also has 2 rushing touchdowns over the last 2 games. Now, the Chicago Bears, they are expected to score just about 19.75 points in Week 9 in a loss to the Dolphins, and usually that's a cause for concern. If you're going to be streaming a quarterback, you usually want to stream one that has a high implied point total, but there could be some shootout potential against a Dolphins defense that has allowed the 6th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, and with Justin Fields finally showing, he's always shown that rushing ability, but with the Bears finally showcasing it and embracing it as part of his artillery, Justin Fields is increasing both his floor and his ceiling, and he's starting to make for a nice streamer and possibly is entering a constant week one, constant QB1 every single week type of territory, which certainly pains me to say that as a Packers fan, if you can see the Packers helmet in the background there. Some of the other guys on my list, if they're probably not available in your league. They're all very, very high rostered, but there are some that are not 100% rostered. And I would be looking at Aaron Rodgers, who's 88%. Tua Tagovailoa is 93%. Derek Carr, and I know he was just, we don't need to dive in deep on that, but there should be some bounce back there. Derek Carr is 81% rostered. Geno Smith is 77%, and Kirk Cousins is 90% rostered. So again, those guys are probably not available in your league, but if they are, and if you're you're in need of a quarterback this week, those are some names I would absolutely be considering. Hopping over to running backs. Now, I was surprised to find that Isaiah Pacheco is still available in 34%, or in 66% of Yahoo leagues. He's rostered in just 34% of Yahoo leagues. Now, the Chiefs, they sent fantasy managers into a Sunday morning frenzy back in week 7 when it was suddenly / randomly announced that Isaiah Pacheco would be the team's quote-unquote starting running back. Ultimately, nothing happened. He did start the game, but he did just play 30% of the snaps. Jerick McKinnon ended up playing 44%. Clyde Edwards-Helaire played 27%. And Pacheco only had 8 touches and 8 touches / carries. Still, he is he's a starting running back on one of the best teams in football, one of the most explosive teams in fantasy football, and especially as heavy bye weeks start to settle in, like here in week 9, we have 6 different teams on bye week. He's particularly attractive, Pacheco is. Pacheco's particularly attractive in games where we can expect the Chiefs to win and win by a lot, and that could start this week as they're 13.5-point favorites over the Titans, and next week they play the Jaguars. So, safe to assume Chiefs are going to be heavy favorites in that one, so Pacheco could actually come into some sneaky volume here. He certainly shouldn't be only 34% rostered in Yahoo leagues. A couple other names that I want to mention quickly here are Rashad White and Alexander Mattison. White is rostered in 30% of leagues. Madison's rostered in 45% of leagues. Neither guy is a standalone fantasy option, even during heavy bye weeks. Neither guy is getting any significant volume to be a flex option in fantasy football, but both guys are the types of guys that would become the number one waiver claim. They would become instant week winners, possible league winners, if the guy in front of them went down. If something happened to Leonard Fournette, if something happened to Dalvin Cook, those guys would instantly be the number one waiver claim unanimously, and they would potentially lead you to a fantasy championship. So, on the off chance that you have a bench spot that's just available for one of those guys, absolutely, after waivers run tomorrow morning, grab those guys and just hide them on your bench for as long as you can, just in case something happens. One last running back that I want to mention here, and again, keep in mind, guys, there's 36 different players on this list that you can check out when time allows. But one other running back that I want to mention here, live on the podcast and live on the show, is Darius Johnson. Now, as of recording this, it's 2:49 p.m. Central on Tuesday, November 1st. And if you haven't heard, there's trades going crazy, right? We have Bradley Chubb going to the Dolphins. We have Chase Edmonds going over to the Broncos. We have TJ Hawkinson going to the Vikings. Chase Claypool's going to the Bears. There's a lot that's happening here during the trade deadline. And keep in mind, as of this recording, Kareem Hunt has not been traded. However, if Kareem Hunt does get traded, and there's been rumblings about him going to the Rams, for example, that would instantly put Darius Johnson in the RB2 spot in Cleveland, which we know can have its own standalone flex value, right? Kareem Hunt has standalone flex value. And then if something, God forbid, were to happen to Nick Chubb, suddenly Darius Johnson could find himself as the RB1 in Cleveland. So again, lots of speculation here. He's a current RB3. There's currently no value there. But if Kareem Hunt does get traded Darius Johnson is absolutely worth picking up in the morning, and frankly, he'd be worth a waiver. He would be worth a waiver claim if Kareem Hunt is traded. So something to keep in mind, something worth adding if, depending on when you're listening to this or watching this, absolutely grab Darius Johnson if you can, depending on what happens with Kareem Hunt. All right, let's hop into some wide receivers. Once again, there's none this week that I would use any sort of priority on. I want to take a quick second to mention that Wan'Dale Robinson and Rondale Moore, so Wan'Dale and Rondale, both guys are still less than 50% owned in Yahoo leagues, which is astonishing to me. Wan'Dale Robinson is owned in just 49% of leagues. Rondale is owned in rostered in 36% of leagues. Those guys should not be rostered in less than 50% of leagues that are out there. So if you have room to add him or add to either guy, absolutely do so. Wan'Dale's going to be the Giants' wide receiver 1, from here on out. Rondale Moore gave fantasy managers a little bit of a scare doing nothing in DeAndre Hopkins' debut, but here week 8 last week, still with DeAndre Hopkins, he had over the last three of the last 4 games, he has 8 or more targets and 10 or more PPR points, and that one of those games is with DeAndre Hopkins. So by all means, Rondale Moore should not be 36% rostered in Yahoo leagues. My favorite addition of the week is Romeo Dabis, probably because I'm a Packers fan, but he's just 47% rostered in Yahoo leagues. He does have 7 or more targets in 4 of his last 6 games, including 3 performances of 15 or more PPR points. Perhaps more importantly, technically it does show up on the stat sheet, but what doesn't really show up on the stat sheet is it's entirely possible that Romeo Dabis added another, he may have earned another little slice of Aaron Rodgers' trust after, I don't know if you've seen it, I don't know if you watched the Packer game, I don't know if you watched Red Zone, but Romeo Dabis made a miraculous touchdown catch on Sunday Night Football against, you wouldn't need Red Zone for that one, but you got me. He made a miraculous touchdown catch against the Bills, and after that, the cameras actually caught, Aaron Rodgers praising Romeo Dabis. So this is all touchy-feely stuff that it's not data, it's not stats, but it's not necessarily a secret that Aaron Rodgers needs to trust the guys that he throws the football to, and Dobbs may have earned just a little bit more trust from number 12 moving forward, and he's already been performing as a wide receiver 3. No reason that guy should be, just 47% rostered in fantasy leagues. He's starting to emerge as, the Packers wide receiver 1, and at worst, the Packers wide receiver 2. That's worth something moving forward, especially this week against the Lions defense that's given up the 6th most PPR points per game to wide receivers, and a game that should look like a shootout. There should be some offensive fireworks in that game. Josh Palmer is somebody worth mentioning. He's only 27% rostered in Yahoo leagues. Frankly, he hasn't really been the greatest as a real football player, but it's hard to ignore the opportunity that's in front of him, right? Mike Williams is expected to miss weeks, not days, quote unquote weeks, not days, from their coaching staff. It's not even a given that Keenan Allen is going to play this week, so there's at least a sliver of a door of opportunity that Josh Palmer could end up the wide receiver 1 catching passes from Justin Herbert as soon as this week. But even if Keenan Allen does play, Palmer was getting, 10.5 PPR points and 7.2 targets per game while Keenan Allen was out, and now Mike Williams is going to miss this week and probably, it sounds like a couple more weeks after this one. So Josh Palmer should definitely be rostered in more than 27% of leagues. Terrace Marshall was one of my favorite 2021 rookies. He was one of my favorite 2021 draft picks. The Carolina Panthers used their 2nd round pick on him last year, and as Robbie Anderson was traded last week, 2 weeks ago, that thrusted Terrace Marshall into the wide receiver 2 spot in Carolina, which we know isn't super attractive from a fantasy football standpoint when you got PJ Walker throwing passes, but PJ balled out this week, and DJ Moore finally went nuts, giving everybody, DJ Moore managers the explosive game they've been waiting for quite a while. Terrace Marshall is 1% rostered. He's played 86 and 93% of the Panthers' offensive snaps since Robbie Anderson was traded, and again, keep in mind, I'm recording this at 2:55 p.m. on Tuesday, November 1st, the trade deadline. But DJ Moore has been the subject of trade discussions. And maybe that's me being a Packers fan and just wishing that he ends up in Green Bay and ends up in green and gold. But on the off chance that DJ Moore gets traded, Terrace Marshall suddenly is the Panthers wide receiver 1. Out of nowhere, Terrace Marshall is the Panthers wide receiver 1. Whether or not he's ready for that remains to be seen. But still, the guy could default into some significant usable fantasy football volume. And even if DJ Moore doesn't get traded, at worst, Terrace Marshall's the wide receiver 2 there. Julio Jones, 18% rostered in Yahoo leagues. He played a season high, which is significant because he's battled injuries all year, but he played a season high 57% of the Buccaneers snaps in week 9, and he operated as the very clear wide receiver 3 in week 8. Now, obviously, being a wide receiver 3 and Tampa's offense hasn't looked that great this year, those things aren't particularly enticing from a fantasy football standpoint, but don't forget, we're maybe a year and a half removed from Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Antonio Brown all being very viable fantasy football options, and we know Julio Jones can absolutely produce when he's healthy, when he's on the field, and we know that Tom Brady can find him, especially in the end zone. But he should definitely be rostered in more than 18% of leagues, especially if the Buccaneers are able to find that next gear and kick it into high octane. Last one I want to mention here is Donovan Peoples-Jones. He is rostered in 24% of Yahoo leagues, and he is actually on bye this week, so it might be relatively easy for you to get him because people won't be looking to use him this week. But he has 11 or more PPR points in 4 of the last 5 games. And let me pull up real quick. Again, if you're on podcast and you're not quite listening to this, you can check this out on YouTube, but I am sharing my screen for the YouTube viewers. What you're looking at right now, this is a weekly resource that I create for my subscribers that shows all of the data, all of the game data, all of the individual analysis. What you'll see over here, these are going to be all the players from this week. I just haven't gotten around to writing them yet. But every single player is going to be listed in one of these columns, and every single player is going to have a note attached to their name that breaks down their week 8 or week 9 matchup in depth. But at the bottom of this resource, you're going to see a tab called Regression. Every week for my subscribers, I put together a little cheat sheet for my subscribers to show which players are mathematically the most likely to score touchdowns and mathematically the least likely to score touchdowns, as well as the team's defenses that are most likely to give up touchdowns to what positions. Now, like I mentioned, Donovan Peoples-Jones is not playing. He's on bye this week, but he was, before I removed him, he was up in this light green column, quote unquote due for over 2+ touchdowns when he returns from bye. So anyways, Donovan Peoples-Jones, great stash if you have room to just kind of hide him on your bench for a week. And don't forget, Deshaun Watson's only a couple weeks away from returning, which is going to be an upgrade for that entire offense altogether. Tight ends. And again, there's several other wide receivers on this list for you to check out when you get a chance. As for tight ends, Evan Ingram is 43% rostered in fantasy football leagues. He has 6 or more targets in each of the last 4 games. And this week he's going to play against a Raiders defense that has allowed the 5th most PPR points per game to tight ends, including the most touchdowns per game to tight ends. And then after this week, the Jaguars play the Kansas City Chiefs next week, and the Chiefs have allowed the 9th most PPR points per game. So Evan Ingram is getting involved at the right time, and he's got some great matchups coming up in the next 2 weeks. He should be rostered in more than 43% of leagues, especially as a tight end, which we know is fantasy football's weakest, thinnest position. Beyond Evan Ingram, another Packer makes the list, and I promise this isn't this like homer bias thing that I have going, but Robert Tonyan, he is rostered in 51% of leagues, so slightly over half of leagues he's rostered in, but He does have 5 or more targets in 4 of the 8 games played this year, which isn't quite as consistent as we would like, but it's something. It's noteworthy, again, at fantasy football's thinnest position. And 5 or more targets, including 2 of the last 3 games. But in week 9, he gets a shootout with the Lions, which is a defense that's allowed the 3rd most PPR points per game to tight ends. I also have Will Dissly, Cade Otton, Greg Dulcich, Tyler Conklin, Isaiah Likely, several other names on this list for you to check out as time allows. But moving over to the defenses, I'm not going to cover these here today. If you want to check out defenses that I'm considering streaming in week 9, please just head over to basementbroodff.com and click on content. There's 4+ defenses for you to check out. On Friday, I'm planning, that's the hard part, but planning on dropping episode 19 of the Basement Brood Fantasy Football Podcast. And that episode is intended to be literally a fantasy football preview for every single game of that week. Keep an eye out for that. That's going to be coming out on Friday. And speaking of things that I'm doing every single week, since it's something that I already do, I was showing you just a moment ago the week 9 heat map. Here's a quick look at week 8's heat map. Again, over on the left side. And this is all going to be part of a package, by the way, that I create every single week for all of my subscribers. Anybody who subscribes to Basement Brood Fantasy Football gets access to this weekly package. And by the way, it costs less than a quarter of a beer per week, right? It's basically like you're buying me a beer every single month for everything that I'm about to tell you. So what you're looking at right now, this is my flagship product, the flagship tool, if you will. This is 250 plus people reference this every single week when they're making critical betting, DFS, and start, sit, and lineup decisions. Over on the right side, it has all of the game data, over-unders, spreads, how many points each team is expected to score, how each defense is performing against specific positions. And over on the right, every single fantasy football relevant player in every single game, every single week, is listed into one of 5 columns that indicate how they are expected to perform compared to what you would normally expect from them. Underneath every name, so if you click here on Derrick Henry, for example, underneath every single name is a thorough, detailed written analysis that I do every single week. This thing takes me 24 hours a week, but it's going to talk about, the implied game script, what to expect from the game overall, how each individual player has been trending, how their backfield competition or teammates have been trending. It's going to talk a bit how the defense has been performing against that position, and it's going to talk about similar performances by similar styles of players that the defense has been giving up. So if, Derrick Henry rushes 30 times, that's not necessarily super convenient for somebody like Tony Pollard who might get 10 or 11 touches. But anyway, 250 to 300 names in here every single week. Anybody that you're possibly considering in fantasy football, DFS, player prop betting, they are all in here, and every single one has their own individual written analysis. That's one thing that you get in this weekly package that I'm giving to all my subscribers. They are also getting, like I mentioned before, the regression cheat sheet. So here you actually see Donovan Peoples-Jones was on that cheat sheet last week. He's actually moved up to the green column here. But the touchdown regression cheat sheet, it's meant to show fantasy football players who mathematically is most or least likely to score touchdowns in the coming week. Subscribers are also getting a streamer cheat sheet. So it's going to show you defenses to consider streaming, kickers to consider streaming, quarterbacks to consider streaming, tight ends to consider streaming. And last but not least, it's going to show you my personal favorite DFS plays in cash leagues, in tournaments, individual notes, games that I will be stacking. Also, in that weekly package, you are going to have access to our members-only Discord community. So this is a place where All of our members, all of our subscribers are hanging out. They're very active in here. They're all in here trying to just help each other win, ask their start-sit questions. Should I do this trade? Who should I pick up on waivers? It is a place where active subscribers are actively hanging out and helping each other win. And last but not least, the other two things I want to mention as part of this, again, this is all in that weekly package that costs a beer per month. That's it, just a beer. You are going to get notifications sent right to your phone whenever there's some sort of recommendation. So, for example, I have when Ryan Tannehill was announced as he was sick and it sounded like he wasn't going to play last week, I sent out a notification to my subscribers saying, hey, if just in case you're in a super flex league, go pick up Malik Willis before your competition does because Ryan Tannehill's not going to play. That's going to come right to your phone. It's going to be right there in your notifications, in your alerts. The last thing is every Monday and Friday, I host a live Ask Me Anything with my subscribers where they can pop in and ask their start sits, their trade questions, their waiver wire questions, etc. But you get the idea. I'll get off my high horse now. That was the longest commercial ever, but you get the idea. Less than one beer per month, or about the cost of one beer per month, and you're getting this entire weekly package that's delivered right to your email and right to the notifications tab on your phone. So something to consider. Please shoot me a email if you want to discuss at Mikey at basementbrewedff.com. Sorry, I'm super distracted. I keep getting these notifications. By the way, the Colts just traded for, or the Bills just traded for Nyheim Hines, and the Colts received, I think, Zach Moss and some draft picks there. But by the time you're listening to this, you already know that anyway. But any questions about anything that we're doing, any questions about the weekly package that we're putting together, you can purchase that on Basement Brewed Fantasy Football, basementbrewedff.com/signup. All of the pricing packages are right there. But if you have any questions about it, please feel free to just send me an email, which is Mikey at basementbrewedff.com, or shoot me a DM on Twitter. I hang out on Twitter quite frequently during actually all year round. You can find me at BBFF Mikey. Shoot me over a quick DM. Give me a follow. Let me know where you came from, and I'll follow you right back. That's it for today. Like I said, check back Friday for episode 19, where we're going to start diving into every single game on the Week 9 slate. As always, please take 12 seconds, 69 seconds, nice, if you can, to like, subscribe, rate, and review the show. That stuff goes way further for me than you might recognize, so I really appreciate that. Either way, thank you so much for tuning in. Cheers. This brew's for you.